Namaskar, friends. Thank you for joining my weekly Dharma talk. Today we'll be doing talks 7 and 8 of my introductory series on Buddhism entitled Fundamental View, and it should take approximately 1 hour. Talk 7 is entitled The Way of Transcendence. The Buddha did not like to answer questions about the world, whether it is eternal or not, or whether it is finite or not. The relationship between the soul and the body, and the post-mortem status of a Tathagata. He discouraged speculating about such things. The Buddha said that instead of speculating, one should work on oneself. This need not imply that the questions have no answers. Thus, the Buddha describes the world, he denies the reality of the soul, he affirms the deathless. One cannot infer from this passage that the Buddha denies ontology, although it is widely interpreted this way. What the Buddha seems to be criticizing is not the validity of ontology, but rather the soteriological value of a certain mode of questioning, that is, trying to infer the nature of the transdual from the standpoint of the dualistic reasoning faculty. In these passages and others, the Buddha presents the alternatives in terms of 2 or 4 logical contraries. For example, the statements that A, after death the Tathagata exists, B, after death the Tathagata does not exist, C, after death the Tathagata both exists and does not exist, and D, after death the Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. The Pali Canon repeats this logical construction, called a tetralemma, all through. The Buddha makes it clear that none of these statements is true or false. He does not say that there is no truth. Rather, he implies that one cannot realize the truth this way. Rather, one must work on oneself to discover the actual experience of the transdual. Spiritual realization is essentially non rational and experiential. One cannot reach it by questioning. Therefore, one cannot reach enlightenment by questioning. The Buddha points toward the answer by indicating that the inquirer should pursue self knowledge, especially the Four Truths. The Four Truths are not theories, but matters of fact, subject to immediate experiential verification. By starting with consciousness, one establishes what one knows. Then one can reason from the known to the unknown. Thus, the Four Truths are not merely psychological, they are ontological. Suffering, desire, and its cessation, and the path itself exist within an ontological context. They also indicate its nature, and it theirs. In this way, the Buddha developed a phenomenology of transcendence, not a psychotherapy or relaxation technique. He had to. Spirituality without ontology is incomplete and therefore imperfect. The teaching is perfect. The apparent denigration of questioning in these passages also reflects a division already present in the ascetic movement between the proponents of wisdom, the cure for ignorance, and the proponents of renunciation, the cure for desire. In time, these separated into the Mahayana and Hinayana schools. Ignorance is the root of the chain of cause and effect, and desire the eighth of the intermediate causal links. The proponents of wisdom argued that since ignorance is the root of the chain of cause and effect, the most effective way to attain enlightenment is to cultivate wisdom directly. Wisdom corresponds to right view, the first step in the Eightfold Path. The Buddha bases right view on seclusion, cessation, and dispassion, maturing in release, quote unquote. A more ascetic school, probably associated with monasticism, held that one should regard the renunciation of craving and purification exemplified by the Vinaya as primary. The primacy of desire seems to underlie the popular view that one finds in many interpretations that the path consists of ethics and meditation, with wisdom as the goal of enlightenment itself and in that order. Such a view seems to be inconsistent with the Eightfold Path, as pointed out by Dr. Peter Macefield. The Eightfold Path presents meditation as the culmination of a path that begins with wisdom and intention. Ethics or self control follows this. This view leads to different conclusions as to how the mind ought to be cultivated in the first place, either by developing the mind and the will or by following ethical precepts and practicing meditation. The latter is included in the former, but at a later stage. The Dalai Lama discusses the value of knowledge and meditation in relation to each other in an interesting YouTube video. He warns that the practice of meditation pursued in isolation without the corresponding development of the mind can lead to dullness rather than clarity. Perhaps this is why the Buddha said that no path that excludes the Eightfold Path is valid. The Buddha describes a series of monastics who attain a little. Agitated by the experience of awakening, they fall into various errors. The lowest one falls into the error of pride because of the prestige of becoming a monastic. He denigrates others. The Buddha says that this monk has only attained the twigs and leaves of the spiritual life, which he compares to the heartwood of a great tree. The next lowest monastic is attached to morality and becomes self righteous. The Buddha says that this monastic has attained the outer bark of the spiritual life and stopped there. The Buddha warns against attachment to rules. The preeminent example is Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin and brother in law. Devadatta broke away from the Buddha and sought to establish a separate community based on a much more rigid interpretation of the rules than the Buddha. The next monastic is attached to concentration. He becomes arrogant. He has attained the inner bark of the spiritual life. The next monastic achieves knowledge and vision. He looks down on others. His is the sapwood. Finally, the monastic who achieves perpetual emancipation has attained the heartwood of the tree, enlightenment itself. The Buddha says that there is no falling away from it. It is a qualitative and definitive change of state. The implication of this story is that the path leading to enlightenment begins with ordination and leads to enlightenment by way of the progressive cultivation of self control, concentration, and wisdom. In this case, one should not conflate wisdom with emancipation, but it is its immediate precursor. Emancipation is a leap in which time ceases, that is, the eternal present of the metaphysical point of view. In the Einsteinian equations, this would mean one is traveling at the speed of light, and interestingly, the Dalai Lama associates this with Shambhala. Thus, wisdom is second only to enlightenment. It is also the first step of the path. This dual view of wisdom creates a paradox. The Eightfold Path is the subject of the fourth truth of Buddhism. It consists of 8 steps: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The Eightfold Path is the template for the practice of the Buddhist path or way, not only in the Pali Canon, but also for all of Buddhism. Its purpose is the fading away of lust, abandoning the fetters, uprooting the underlying tendencies, understanding rebirth, destroying the taints, and realizing the fruit of true knowledge and liberation for the sake of gnosis, vision, and final emancipation without attachment. In other words, detachment and wisdom are both the means and the goal. Right view is formally the knowledge of the truth of suffering, formulated in the Four Truths. Right intention is the intention to renounce unwholesome intentions. Right speech is the renunciation of lying, gossip, harmful speech, etc. Right action is the observance of the other moral and ethical norms. Intention, speech, and action correspond to mind, speech, and body. Right livelihood consists of earning a living by ethical means implied in right action. Right livelihood prohibits Buddhists from trading in weapons, human beings, that is, slavery and prostitution, flesh, that is, breeding animals, intoxicants, and poisons. Right effort is the desire and effort to cultivate wholesome actions, apparently an intensification of right intention. Right mindfulness is clarity of consciousness with respect to the experience of body, mind, and phenomena. Right concentration refers to the practice of meditation, consisting of seclusion, the cultivation of awareness, and mental concentration, leading to the four meditative states. There are several things worth noting about this presentation of the path. First, the Pali word samma, often translated as right, conveys a deeper meaning which underscores that each step of the Eightfold Path must be fully realized in its entirety before moving on to the next. This challenges the common interpretation of the path as a linear progression from an inferior to a superior state. Some might reduce right view to an intellectual exercise or a simple formality, but such an interpretation misses the point that right view is a profound, transformative realization, not just a concept to be learned. The Eightfold Path is not merely about adhering to external rules or steps, it's about genuine, lived experience and transformation at every stage. Dr. Peter Macefield makes a similar point with respect to the translation of Aryan in the context of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. While dictionaries typically render Aryan as noble, Dr. Macefield criticizes this translation and suggests the term supermundane instead. By this, he emphasizes the extraordinary, transcendent nature of the path, to highlight the depth and transformative nature of the path, which cannot be approached casually or as a mere formality. View refers to an awakening by which one experiences the truth of the teaching as direct intuitive certainty. View excludes the perfection of the will, otherwise the path would not need to refer to intention. Since it is will, volition, or intention that underlies moral causality, the establishment of view alone cannot mean that one no longer generates karma. The canon also refers to this experience as opening the Dharma eye. By this experience, one becomes a student. One wonders about the notion that view automatically means that one becomes a stream entrant or stream winner. A stream entrant or enterer will attain enlightenment and has ceased to generate new causes and effects. Karmic non generation could only be true of the aspirant who had perfected his intention. Of course, the perfection of view logically leads to the perfection of intention, as so perhaps the distinction is merely semantic. One might compare view with the Christian concept of conversion or metanoia. Nevertheless, the attainment of view is far more than a conversion in the common or religious sense. Technically, view is a qualitative transformation of the mind. One might understand the Eightfold Path as a progressive refinement of a substance, such as gold, which has already gone through a fundamental transformation, but none of its changes defile it. This is the meaning of the graduated path. It is the hypostasization of a potential that manifests in the first step and is always present in essence. All wisdom traditions of the world report the awakening experience. What is unique to Buddhism is that the central aspect of view consists of a deep realization of the truth of suffering, including its cause and cure. This realization is the immediate trigger of the realization of view. Elsewhere, the Buddha says that the realization of change is the decisive experience of his enlightenment. Still others mention awareness of the breathing. All these things are interrelated. All lead to the comprehensive and essential realization of emptiness, emancipation, And finally, the leap into the transdual itself. Mayfield quotes a passage in which the Buddha says, quote, right view races on ahead, which it does, according to the commentary, in order to prepare the path, quote unquote. It is, as it were, a decisive glimpse of a future attainment. Therefore, it follows that there are at least two distinct transformative states, perhaps more, an initial awakening followed by enlightenment or emancipation. Enlightenment and emancipation can be further differentiated with reference to the Buddha's enlightenment at the age of 35 and his final emancipation at the age of 80. We have also referred to an illumination or Kundalini type experience that he had while still an ascetic. In addition, there is the intimation of his childhood experience under the rose apple tree. The Eightfold Path is clearly a sequence of steps. Nevertheless, the conventional order of the path begins with the cultivation of ethics or self control. The cultivation of meditation follows ethics, culminating in wisdom as the effect of the practice of the foregoing. Convention hardly mentions intention and effort. The actual order of the path, as presented by the Buddha, and I do not believe any texts present the Eightfold Path in any other order, proceeds from the establishment of perfect wisdom to the will to attain self control, speech, action, and livelihood, to cultivating wholesomeness. The path culminates in meditation, consisting of energy, awareness, and concentration. The sequential view of the Eightfold Path presents a different picture of the path than the usual presentation by those who might wish to make the observance of Vinaya the foundation of the path and meditation its exclusive spiritual practice, with little emphasis on study. However, this can lead to an imbalance that can lead to delusion. Another noteworthy point is the inclusion of livelihood in this very august list. This shows that the householder can pursue the path as such. A monastic cannot practice livelihood, strictly speaking, since a monastic may not work. The only possible conclusion is that the path is not reserved for a monastic elite, but for a spiritual elite that includes both monastic and lay Buddhist practitioners. The noble community exists within and above the ignoble community. The Buddha recommended the practice of meditation to both householders and women. The Buddha also addresses the thorny question of who can teach. He had already devolved the formula of ordination to the monks. This made the Buddhist community a decentralized, if not perfectly flat, social network. In accord with the Buddha's last words, the community did not become truly hierarchical until after his death, when they instituted a hierarchy based on seniority. The Buddha states that anyone who has attained the first meditative state may teach. Implicitly, this assumes that wisdom and self restraint have already been mastered, as these qualities are foundational to the path and precede the attainment of deeper meditative states. On the other hand, the first meditative state is primarily a mental state, characterized by the presence of thinking, rapture, and the pleasure of seclusion, rather than being purely cognitive or intellectual in nature. Two ordinations. When Ananda suggested that the spiritual life consists half of virile effort, quote unquote, and half of the companionship of good friends and comrades, the Buddha declared the companionship of good friends and comrades to be the entire spiritual life. The community is egalitarian. The Buddha says that to achieve such an order, the members must rely on each other as they rely on the Buddha himself. Everyone teaches everyone else. The community venerates the Buddha less as an idol than as an equal, quote, by relying upon the Buddha also as a good friend, quote unquote. The community also shared property equally, like the inhabitants of Uttarakuru. Nevertheless, the Buddha ordained other recluses as though he were releasing them from the household life into homelessness. The ascetics say to the Buddha, quote, "We were very nearly lost. We very nearly perished. For formerly we claimed that we were ascetics, though we were not ascetics. We claimed that we were Brahmins, though we were not really Brahmins. We claimed that we were Arhats, though we were not really Arhats. But now we are ascetics. Now we are Brahmins. Now we are Arhats." Quote unquote. The Bodhisattva began his spiritual career as a recluse. This inverts the relationship of Gautama to the group of 5 ascetics with whom he started. They rejected him because, being close to death, he violated his vow of abstinence, in their view, by eating some rice pudding offered to him by a village girl, Sujata. Sujata believed that he was the spirit of the tree under which he sat. Now the Buddha is receiving the ascetics into the homeless life. The interaction is clearly a kind of initiation or transmission. It includes elements of supplication, characterized by humility and contrition, conversion, and usually some instruction by the Buddha, the so-called Dharma in brief. And acceptance and ascending forth follows the transmission in what appears to be a formalized practice. The ascetics were recluses. They were the yogis of other non-Vedic schools who, like the Buddha, were hostile to the Brahmins. They came to the Buddha and accepted his teaching. He in turn recognized them and accepted them into the order. Then they go forth into seclusion, apparently from the community as well, often to attain emancipation. The Buddha seems to have instituted 2 parallel formulas of ordination, including an extended community. A reclusive elite lived between society and the community. One thinks immediately of the Tibetan Mahasiddhas of the 8th to 12th centuries. A similar tradition survives today amongst the Thai forest monks. Admission to the extended community appears to have been highly decentralized and relatively easy. Admission to the noble community appears to have been the prerogative of the Buddha and perhaps his closest disciples. Such recluses must have lived on the edge of society. They still engaged in alms gathering, therefore, they could not have been utterly solitary. Even Kondanya, the Buddha's first disciple, did not live so far that he was unable to travel on foot to the Buddha and worship his feet before returning to his Himalayan retreat. There he died the next day. The texts imply that the imminent death was the reason for the visit, so it could not have been far. These recluses practiced the last 3 steps of the Eightfold Path: effort, mindfulness, and concentration. They lived alone in clearings, forests, and other secluded places. The practice of meditation leads naturally to progressively subtle states of mind. This culminates in the realization of sentience, mind, emptiness, concentration, and bliss, the divine eye of the pure bright mind. Commonly referred to as the luminous mind, this is the clear precursor of the Mahayana doctrine of the clear light. He realizes his identity with other beings. He understands his former births and the mechanisms of moral causality and rebirth. A key point is the repeated statement that one realizes all these states in and with the body. The Buddha rejects the theory of a soul that separates from the body. However, the Buddha does not deny the reality of meditative states of mind. Since the soul does not dissociate, one can only experience these states in the body. Realizing the nature of reality, he achieves transcendence and experiences the direct and intuitively certain fact of liberation. This group may have been the nucleus of what became the community of saints. Another place to which the Buddhist recluses retired was the charnel ground. The Indian charnel ground was not a pleasant place. The remains of corpses in all stages of decomposition filled it. Some still had pieces of cloth clinging to them, which the early Buddhist recluses gathered, pieced together, and sewed into robes. Ascetics survived on the food offerings left for the dead by relatives and friends. The standard period of meditation in a charnel ground was 12 years. Padmasambhava completed the charnel ground meditation more than once. Meditating in charnel grounds was a pan-Indian practice. Non-Buddhist recluses outside the Brahmin orthodoxy also observed it. Recluses must have included Proto-Shaivite and Proto-Tantric practitioners. They also practiced sleep deprivation and fasting. Here is more evidence of a Proto-Tantric thread in early Buddhism. Meditating in a charnel ground brings one face to face with the reality of human existence, with a bodily immediacy of transformative power. Such practices appear to have been reserved for an elect within the Buddhist community. They requested permission from the Buddha to go forth. They also gained inspiration from a personal encounter with the Buddha himself. Not only monastics approached the Buddha in this way, householders too went forth. Some achieved enlightenment after a relatively brief time. Summary. In summary, the discussion of the Buddhist way of transcendence involves questions concerning the ontological status of enlightenment, the role of questioning, the role of rationality, and the nature of the human state. The Buddha said that asking and answering such questions would not lead to the desireless state. Nevertheless, the Buddha himself asked and answered such questions in a 45-year conversation with anyone who cared to approach him. The Eightfold Path begins with the cultivation of perfect wisdom. The Buddha describes the world. He denies the reality of the soul. He affirms the deathless. The Buddha recognized that reason could only lead so far. A leap into the void follows the mastery of reason. One must cultivate reason to transcend it. Ignorance is the root of the chain of causality. The direct cognition of trans-dual reality can induce an intellectual simulacrum of the experience of transcendence that can trigger the Buddha potential, resulting in complete transcendence. By cultivating the appropriate qualities, anyone can achieve awakening ultimately. The realization of the ubiquity of suffering leads to the deep ontological realization of suffering, change, and emptiness. This definitive transformation of state makes one a student of the teaching. It sets one upon the path that leads inevitably to enlightenment. It is subject only to the contingency of unripened causes. The attainment of view is not absolute. It is only the first step, decisive though it is. Volition is always present. Therefore, one can still deviate from the path at any time prior to complete and perfect enlightenment, which is a qualitative change of state from which there is no return. The community includes the ignoble and the noble, as suggested by Dr. Macefield, thus creating a community within a community. Although it is the culmination of the path, many people, including householders, may practice meditation beneficially. It is not secret. Enlightenment consists in the attainment of the divine eye of the luminous mind. There is no soul. One experiences all spiritual realizations in the body. All are immediate, certain, and blissful. Enlightenment is not effectless. It is a state of deep and abiding bliss. Okay, so that does complete talk 7. Thank you for your attention. We'll proceed momentarily with talk 8, the art of meditation. And that will complete tonight's talk. Or today's, depending on where you're located in the world. Buddhism is primarily a method of mental cultivation. The Buddha says that there is nothing as unwieldy, harmful, and prone to suffering as an undeveloped mind. There is nothing as wieldy, beneficial, and prone to happiness as a developed mind. Mental development or self-cultivation entails two things primarily: serene mental concentration and awareness. The development of serenity leads to the stilling of lust, craving, or attachment, and develops the mind. The development of awareness leads to wisdom and the abandonment of ignorance, the root cause of the chain of cause and effect. The combination of serenity and awareness leads to the realization of the Eightfold Path, and thence to enlightenment itself. The development of serenity and awareness are the two essential requisites of the path. All spiritual methods or techniques, no matter how apparently complex, are ultimately reducible to either one or the other or some combination of the two. Ananda, the Buddha's main disciple, identifies four possible combinations: serenity followed by awareness, awareness followed by serenity, the progressive alternation of serenity and awareness, and a rather interesting one: anxiety or agitation spontaneously resolved by the arising of serenity and awareness through some sort of spiritual crisis. Bodhi glosses this crisis as the spontaneous arising of awakening. One may compare this concept with the great European mystic George Ivanovich Gurdjieff's concept of the shock, or Padmasambhava's concept of the leap, by which one achieves a fundamental change of state. Chan Buddhism calls this instantaneous enlightenment, which became the basis of the argument between the gradualists and the subtilists. Jesus also alludes to such a state in the Gospel of Thomas. Ananda declares that these are the only ways to experience emancipation. The Buddha identifies four types of people: one who gains internal serenity of mind, but does not gain the higher wisdom of awareness into phenomena; one who gains the higher wisdom of awareness into phenomena, but not the internal serenity of mind; one who gains neither; and one who gains both. Thus, one should approach one who has developed the faculty or realization in which one is lacking, for instruction on how to develop that realization. One who has achieved both should establish themselves in them, as well as applying themselves to the further destruction of the taints. The Pali English Dictionary states that the taints consist of attachment to sensuality, rebirth, and ignorance. The commentaries added a fourth taint, which the Pali English Dictionary translates as speculation or wrong view, to the list several centuries later. In the context of memorizing the teachings, the Buddha identifies lust, anger, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse, and doubt as factors that disturb the equanimity of the mind and so inhibit memorizing and by implication studying the teachings. These are the five hindrances. The hindrances disturb the mind and make it impossible to recognize its true nature. The Buddha compares the refinement of the mind to the process by which gold is refined. Gold is a metaphor for the inherent lucidity of sentience itself. One washes, rinses, cleans, and finally melts gold in a formula suggestive of European alchemy, explored deeply by the great psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, for example. The reference to melting is especially interesting. One of the popular notions about Buddhism is that it is passive, but one finds references all through the Pali Canon to the cultivation of will and the development of energy, or virile force, quote unquote, as essential elements of the path. The Buddha himself was described as a virile bull of a man, quote unquote. The sexual potency of the male monastics is emphasized. Here, these metaphors go even further. If gold is the mind, what does melting the mind mean? Compare the Tibetan concept of tummo, or psychic heat, analogous to kundalini, tapas, or even chi. Pure gold, originally brittle, becomes pliant, workable, and bright. The notion of mental pliancy pervades the Pali Canon. The Buddha says, quote, There comes a time when one's mind becomes inwardly steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. That concentration is then calm and refined. It has attained full tranquility and achieved mental unification. Strenuous suppression of the defilements does not maintain it. Then, but to whatever mental state realizable by direct knowledge he directs his mind, he achieves the capacity of realizing that state by direct knowledge whenever the necessary conditions obtain. Quote unquote. The scientific precision of this statement is remarkable. The Buddha refers to various mental powers or psychic abilities. One may develop these abilities by means of meditation. These include bilocation, invisibility, levitation, passing through matter, traveling cross legged through the sky, mastery of the body, clairaudience, clairvoyance, telepathy, and remembering past lives, both of oneself and others. Yogis also attest to these powers. Techniques to develop them were highly developed by the Tibetans in particular. Whether one accepts these powers literally or as psychic experiences, the literature of parapsychology teems with many accounts of similar experiences and abilities. It is hard for Westerners to appreciate how far such powers may be developed, since there is nearly no culture for their development in our secular materialist society. Nevertheless, over the past 100 years, science itself has gone far beyond the materialistic description of the world. It seems more cogent to accept the reality of psychic powers, at least provisionally, than to reject them altogether as mere fabrications. The Pali Canon enumerates specific individuals in the ancient community to whom the Buddha attributed such powers. Westerners tend to reject such abilities dogmatically, but are the reality of curved space, time dilation, atomic energy, multiverses, the quantum act of observation, strings, black holes, virtual particles, singularities, the Big Bang, the holographic universe, or artificial intelligence or AI any less fantastic? All of these are commonplaces of 21st century science and will define the Buddhism of the future. As an aid to meditation, the Buddha recommended attending to an image or a sign that opposes any distraction. One can counteract evil, unwholesome thoughts, such as hatred, desire, and delusion, by concentrating on some sign connected with what is wholesome. In this way, the mind becomes steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. Bodhi gives examples of the kinds of signs that the Buddha recommended in specific situations. For example, one can counteract sensual desire by contemplating the unattractiveness of the body. One can counteract desire toward inanimate objects by contemplating change. One can counteract hatred toward living beings by contemplating loving kindness. One can counteract hatred toward inanimate objects by meditating on the elemental nature of things. One can counteract delusion by studying the teaching. If, after meditating on these signs, the distraction persists, the Buddha recommends meditating on the danger inherent in the distraction. If one continues to be distracted, the Buddha recommends simply ignoring the distraction. If the distraction continues, the Buddha recommends inquiring into its causes in an indefinite succession leading to subtler and subtler causes, culminating finally in quiescence. Finally, and only if the distraction continues, the Buddha recommends, quote, crushing the mind with the mind, unquote, or forcibly repressing the distraction through sheer force of will and determination. The Buddha says, quote, this monk is called a master of the courses of thought. He will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think, quote unquote. Note, however, that repression is the Buddha's last resort. Similarly, No matter how people speak to you, the Buddha recommends remaining indifferent and responding to them with an altruistic mind. As in the loving kindness meditation, one expands that intention outward from that individual to all individuals and ultimately to all living beings and thence to the universe, even, to use the Buddha's metaphor, quote, if bandits were to sever you savagely limb from limb with a two-handled saw, quote unquote. Jesus famously recommended plucking out one's eye or cutting off one's mind in similar circumstances. However, I'm not actually recommending this. Don't try this at home. For one who is on the path, the Buddha recommends contemplating the Buddha, the teaching, the order, morality, generosity, and the divine beings. One takes these things as objects of one's concentrated attention. The qualities of the object of the meditation arise in the mind of the meditator, resulting in inspiration, gladness, rapture, calm, happiness, and concentration. Meditations on the Buddha and the divine beings became important practices within Tibetan Buddhism. But the Buddha declares the four foundations of awareness to be the essential elements of the path that leads inevitably to emancipation. One establishes each step, once acquired, in a progressive direction that cannot be reversed, the so called one way. I follow Bodhi's interpretation here. The path is negentropic, as distinct from the entropic nature of the world, which leads to ever greater degeneration. The four foundations of awareness are awareness of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena in an ascending arc that leads from the particular to the universal and from the gross to the subtle. Body corresponds to the element of earth, feelings to the element of water, mind to the element of air, and finally phenomena to the element of fire, that is, the dynamic principle of causality. One can establish awareness of the body by means of seclusion, sitting, and cultivating awareness of the breath, the life force of the body, embodied in the Indian concept of soul. Of cultivating a global awareness of the body. Meditation is not a state of dissociation. Awareness may be extended to the posture and finally to the comprehension of the three marks or characteristics of existence: change, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. One undermines attachment to the body by analyzing the body into its elements, namely hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones and marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, stomach, feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, oil of the joints, and urine. The nine charnel ground meditations include contemplating one's body in various states of decay. These contemplations include a bloated corpse, a corpse devoured by animals, a desiccated skeleton, and finally a pile of disintegrating bones. The corpse meditations bear a striking resemblance to the Chod cult of Tibetan Buddhism. The practitioner visualizes their own body and offers their flesh as the offering at a tantric feast, a ganachakra. Iconographically, the skin of the practitioner's body represents illusory surface reality. One cuts it from bones that represent the true self. Bodhi suggests that these practices may involve visualizations of the body in the various states. However, advanced Buddhist adepts also practices the charnel ground contemplations in actual charnel grounds, which must have been extraordinarily psychologically powerful. Contemplation of the feelings is simply being aware of the pleasurable or unpleasurable state of one's feelings without attachment. In contemplating the mind, one replaces the awareness of feelings with awareness of one's own mental state. Contemplation of phenomena involves awareness of phenomena in terms of the five hindrances, the five aggregates, the six senses, the seven enlightenment factors, and the four truths. This means being aware of attachment to phenomena, change, sense perceptions, one's state of realization, and suffering. Recognizing the factors of enlightenment within oneself is included in the contemplation of phenomena because this refers to an objective recognition of the ontological status of one's realization. Realization is not subjective. Enlightenment is not a subjective quality or state, any more than the bliss or rapture of enlightenment is a feeling. The Buddha states that the practice of the Four Foundations of Awareness over a period of 7 years leads to stream entry. One either achieves final enlightenment immediately, or one is reborn in one of the pure abodes. From here, one attains enlightenment directly, with no more human rebirth. Rebirth in the pure abodes is the one rebirth in the world that the Buddha says he never experienced. To be reborn there means that one is never reborn as a human being. And the Buddha goes on to say something very remarkable, which I will quote in full. Let alone 7 years, monks. If anyone should develop these four establishments of awareness in such a way for 6 years, for 5 years, for 4 years, for 3 years, for 2 years, for 1 year, one of two fruits could be expected for him, either final knowledge here and now, or, if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. Let alone 1 year, monks. If anyone should develop these four states of awareness in such a way for 7 months, for 6 months, for 5 months, for 4 months, for 3 months, for 2 months, for 1 month, for half a month, one of two fruits could be expected for him, either final knowledge here and now, or, if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning. Let alone half a month, monks. If anyone should establish these four establishments of awareness in such a way for 7 days, one may expect one of two fruits, either final knowledge here and now, or, if there is a trace of clinging left, non-returning, quote unquote. This passage repeats all through the Pali Canon. It directly contradicts the common assumption that enlightenment is an exceptional achievement that takes hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of rebirths to achieve. One finds this assertion repeated endlessly in the popular Buddhist literature. We have already alluded to the evidence of householders achieving awakening and even final emancipation after a brief period, generally stated to be 5 or 7 days. The Theravada interpretation of this fact is that these individuals were associated with the Buddha in past lives. These advanced practitioners were already on the verge of awakening, perhaps. But this quotation suggests that this is not the whole explanation. The implication is clear. Establishing oneself in the four foundations of awareness leads to awakening at least after no more than 7 years, but may result in awakening and even final emancipation almost immediately if the karmic conditions are proper. There are examples in the canon of householders achieving final enlightenment within 5 days of going forth. The passage quoted is clear. Awakening is not the exclusive prerogative of a special elite or of reborn prior associates of the Buddha. To repeat, if anyone, that is, anyone, should establish these four establishments of awareness in such a way for 7 days, one of two fruits could be expected for him or her, either final knowledge here and now, or, if there is a trace of attachment left, non-returning. Ananda's riddle. Ananda, the Buddha's personal attendant, presents a riddle to the Buddha. This is a rare instance of an actual riddle in the Pali Canon. Of course, riddles became a popular pastime in certain sects of Zen Buddhism, the so-called Quan. In any case, the riddle is, quote, is there one thing that when developed and cultivated fulfills four things, and four things that when developed and cultivated fulfill seven things, and seven things that when developed and cultivated fulfill two things, quote unquote. It is curious that Ananda presents this riddle to the Buddha and not the other way around, and it's reminiscent actually of the riddle of the Sphinx. The Buddha's answer is that concentrating on breathing is the one thing that, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the four establishments of awareness: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. The four establishments of awareness, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the seven factors of enlightenment: awareness, discrimination, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. The seven factors of enlightenment, when developed and cultivated, fulfill true knowledge and liberation. Wisdom and emancipation are set against each other as co-determining factors, like the co-determination of consciousness and name and form in the chain of cause and effect. The text emphasizes the preeminent importance of wisdom in the realization of emancipation, and this is an association which one finds throughout the Pali Canon, as I have repeatedly emphasized. It is interesting that the one thing in the sequence is not the goal, but rather the means: awareness of the breathing. Awareness of breathing is the essential technique. Specifically prescribed for restlessness, Bodhi notes that the Nikayas recognize awareness of breathing as a technique of fundamental importance. The importance of breath meditation is due to the pan-Indian association of the breath with the vital life force associated with the soul. Even though the Buddha repudiated the metaphysical doctrine of the soul as such, he still emphasizes the breathing meditation technique itself. The Buddha declares that awareness of breathing is the essential meditation by which he attained enlightenment. Even after attaining enlightenment, during his 45-year teaching career, the Buddha continued to practice awareness of breathing in retreat. He uniquely refers to this technique as the Tathagata's dwelling, quote unquote. It is significant that the Buddha continues this practice even after becoming a perfected being. The development of awareness of breathing underlies all four establishments of awareness. It constitutes the universal underlying technique leading to the seven factors of enlightenment and thence to wisdom and emancipation itself. The 31 planes of existence are also levels or stages of realization. There is no ultimate distinction in Buddhism between macrocosm and microcosm, the universal and the individual, ontology and psychology, reality and mind. The three realms of reality are the worlds of desire, form, and formless mind. The form world consists of four sets of three worlds and five pure abodes. The four formless worlds supersede these worlds. The form and formless worlds correspond to the four meditative attainments, followed by the realization of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Altogether, there are 8 successive stages of realization. The Bodhisattva achieved the realization of the state of nothingness under his first teacher, Alara Kalama. He realized neither perception nor non-perception under his second teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta. Although the meditative attainments are associated with the last step of the Eightfold Path, perfect concentration, lay people can attain the meditative attainments. Thus, the Eightfold Path is not the prerogative of monastics. The first meditative attainment is the lowest. The first meditative attainment corresponds to Mahabrahma with his ministers and retinue, a kind of divine kingdom. The king of this kingdom is the great Brahma. Great Brahma is a divine being, originally from the next highest level, who has been reborn in the Brahma worlds due to loss of merit. Devolution is the fate that befalls all divine beings, since despite their high spiritual status, they are still imperfect. Human beings themselves have descended from a divine realm. One may simply regard great Brahma as God, again putting that word in quotes. He is famous for his delusion that he is the creator of the universe. This idea is like the Gnostic view of the biblical Yahweh, who is regarded as a demiurge or false god. The attainment of the first meditative state is essentially equivalent to the religious goal of reaching heaven. And again, I'm putting that word in quotes. Residents of the Brahma realms can enter our realm and interact with us. They visited and spoke with the Buddha at night. Communicating with divine beings during extended periods of seclusion is common in the Tibetan tradition. The second meditative attainment corresponds to three worlds of radiance. The third meditative attainment corresponds to three worlds of glory. The worlds beyond the meditative attainments are split into infinite space and infinite consciousness, nothingness, and the opening to the transdual. These are the four formless worlds, consisting only of mind. This structure suggests the Kabbalistic conception of ayin, nothingness, ein sof, limitlessness or infinite space, and or ein sof, limitless light, followed by 10 worlds of being, this is so-called sephirot. This diagram is called the tree of life, or Etz Chaim. It is the fundamental ontological structure of the Hebrew mysticism called Kabbalah. One attains the first meditative attainment by withdrawing from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. This state is still cognitive, combined with the rapture and happiness born of seclusion. With further practice, the cognitive aspect of the first meditative attainment drops away. The arising of confidence and unification of mind without cognition, and the rapture and happiness born of concentration characterizes it. This is the second meditative attainment. With further practice, the quality of rapture disappears. Equanimity, awareness, and clear comprehension arise, accompanied by happiness in the body. This is the third meditative attainment. With further practice, pleasure and pain, that is, of the body, and joy and displeasure disappear. The purification of awareness by equanimity characterizes it. This is the fourth meditative attainment. With further practice, the perception of form, sensation, and diversity completely disappear. One realizes infinite space. This is the first of the four formless worlds. With further practice, the realization of the infinity of space disappears. One realizes that consciousness is infinite. This is the second of the four formless worlds. With further practice, the realization of the infinity of consciousness disappears. One becomes aware that there is nothing. This is the third of the four formless worlds. Finally, with further practice, the realization of nothingness disappears. One enters a transdual state of neither perception nor non perception. This is the fourth of the four formless worlds and the highest worldly state. None of these states is identical with complete emancipation. True emancipation is beyond them all. So that completes today's Dharma talk. Thank you very much for your attention. We will conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. According to the Buddha, based on the law of cause and effect, everything one thinks, says, and does has a result. Every result is in turn a cause of further results in an infinitely interconnected network of cause and effect. The Dharma itself is especially efficacious. It creates beneficial results wherever it spreads. This effectiveness is the power of truth. A common term for this effect is merit. Most of the merit of teaching or even talking about Dharma returns, not only to the speaker, but also to the listeners. The dedication of merit establishes the intention to sacrifice the merit that one receives in favor of others. The dedication of merit is an act of generosity. Generosity itself is karmically efficacious and thus generates more merit. By redirecting the merit that one receives to others, the dedication of merit acts like an amplifier, redirecting ever greater merit to others. Thus, one becomes an agent of ever increasing merit. The dedication of merit causes the merit of the Dharma to spread exponentially through the whole system. Please feel free to join me in this. By the merit of this talk, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings. Namaskar. Thank you, as always, for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. I will return next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to present another talk in this series of Dharma talks, which is actually a repeat of a live talk which I give on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I also d- teach at every other every other week at the Buddha Garden, and I also teach a guided meditation called Guru Yoga Practice every Monday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time online. Namaskar.